My wife came home late after the company party and wearing a man's perfume. When I asked her, she laughed and said, "It's nothing, some man must have bumped into me and smelled like a man." So I started investigating and discovered something shocking that made me open my eyes and get a divorce immediately. She was desperate when she found out about the divorce and told me the whole truth, but I was already moving on. It was that night that everything started to fall apart. She arrived unhurriedly, her lipstick too intact, her eyes too bright, and that perfume that wasn't hers. I knew every scent she used, every soft fragrance that was part of the mornings and nights in our house. But that smell was aggressive, striking, masculine, and even before I asked I already knew, something was wrong. When I asked her, she just laughed, as if she were ridding herself of a silly guilt, and gave me an answer that offended me more than a confession. It must have been a colleague, he bumped into me, and the smell stayed, with that light tone, as if my distrust was just insecurity, as if our entire story could be dismantled with a joke. And that was exactly what made me get up from my chair and stop trusting. I didn't sleep that night. For the first time, I felt like my home wasn't safe. My bed was cold, even with her lying next to it. And it was like that, in silence, that my heart began to drift away. Not by choice, but by survival. I wanted to be wrong. I swear to God I wanted to be wrong. But a part of me screamed that something had broken forever that night. And so I began to investigate, like someone looking for air in a windowless room. I went through the schedules, analyzed archived messages, noticed subtle changes in her behavior. The way she looked at her phone and smiled, the way she dressed more to go out than to stay home, the excuses that were too new, the absences that were too long. I was facing the truth, but I refused to accept it completely. Until one night, while I was looking through an old notebook, I found something. Nothing explicit, nothing that screamed betrayal, but there was a history of messages with a name saved as "old client." The conversations had times, ironies, codes hidden in compliments. I read and reread those messages like someone trying to translate a strange language, until I understood that that man, that client, was much closer to her than I had been in the last few months. My body froze. There was no going back. I didn't cry. Not at that moment. I just got up and went to her, who was sitting on the couch, watching some random program, laughing out loud, as if nothing was out of place. "You betrayed me," I said. I didn't yell. There was no anger in my voice. Just weariness. She looked at me as if she didn't understand. But she did. She was silent for a long time, as if considering whether it was worth lying to her again. And then she said, "You're imagining things." The words came out softly, and she tried to sound calm. But her voice was shaking. And that was when I knew, I didn't need proof anymore. It was real. It was concrete. She had betrayed me. The next morning, she woke up with the divorce papers on the table. I had signed them. The silence in the house was as heavy as lead. She cried. Not because she truly regretted it, but because she didn't expect me to have the courage to leave. She asked me to talk, she said it wasn't what I had in mind, she begged for time. I got up, grabbed my suitcase, and simply said, "I don't want to hear excuses from someone who knew what she was doing." She stood there, her eyes red, her knees weak, her face swollen with tears. But I left. The next few days were strange. I was free, but not whole. I was starting over, but still bleeding. And yet, I kept going. I started running, reading, meeting friends, smiling a little more each day. Not because I wanted to show that I was fine, but because I needed to breathe without pain again. Until, a month later, she came to me. She arrived exhausted, thinner, with sunken eyes. She handed me a letter. "I can't say it all, so I wrote it down," she said, and left. The letter was long. Hard. True. She said that yes, she had cheated on me. That it all started as a silly need, a dangerous distraction. That she felt wanted in a way she hadn't felt in years, that she didn't think about the consequences, that she never thought she would lose everything. And then came the part that paralyzed me. She said that even though she cheated on me, she never stopped loving me. That she only realized how much I was worth when she lost me. That every word I said that day of the divorce echoed inside her every day. That the other man meant nothing, and that since the day he left home, she had been crying to sleep. She asked for forgiveness. She said she understood if I never wanted to see her again. But she needed me to know that she regretted it. Deeply. Not as someone who wants to avoid suffering, but as someone who understands too late what she destroyed with her own hands. And that's when I realized. That pain that tore me apart inside had turned into something stronger, peace. I no longer felt anger. Or pity. Just the certainty that I had done the right thing. That I had left before I lost myself. And perhaps the most curious thing was realizing that, deep down, I was grateful. For everything. Because it was through that betrayal that I discovered who I really was. The letter ended with a request: if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Waiting. Always. But when she sent it to me, it was too late. I was already with someone else. Someone who looked at me as if I were the only man in the world. Someone who smiled at me sincerely, without hiding anything. Someone who wasn't afraid to love me truly. And when the traitor called me a few days later to ask what I thought of the letter, all I could say was, "Thank you for writing." I needed to read it. But today, I am a man you no longer deserve. Her silence on the other end was the answer I had never received before. And then I hung up. But the real question that remained in the air was not whether she regretted it. Nor whether I was able to move on. The question that echoes is, what makes a person destroy the love that took years to build, and only realize it when it's too late? Welcome to the channel. Here, there is no excuse for cheating, no romance, and much less support. All the stories you will hear are fictional, but they carry deep truths about how infidelity destroys lives, families, and hearts. Our goal is clear: to show that those who cheat lose much more than they imagine. Get ready now, because what you're about to hear is shocking. Good story. Marcus always believed that love was a daily, silent construction, made of small gestures, knowing glances and patience. He was an ordinary man, soft-spoken, with an attentive gaze, who learned early on that respect and commitment are choices, not just feelings. He grew up in a simple neighborhood, surrounded by examples of broken marriages, broken promises and pain that dragged through the hallways of houses like ghosts. So, when he met Lauren, he decided to do everything differently. I didn't just want to be with someone, I wanted to make it work. I wanted to be a shelter, a partner, a safe haven. She appeared in his life as someone who came to add value, with a smile that seemed to disarm any resistance and a vibrant energy that contrasted with her usual calm. Lauren was charismatic, ambitious, one of those women who seemed made to shine in any environment, and from the first moment their paths crossed, Marcus knew that she was not like the others. They met at a cafe, by chance, one afternoon in March, when he accidentally spilled her coffee while trying to balance a stack of reports he was carrying in his arms. She laughed, didn't get angry, and that was enough to break the ice. They talked right there, amidst papers and coffee stains on the table, as if they had known each other from past lives. What was supposed to be an apology turned into an invitation to dinner and, from then on, a relationship that grew quickly but solidly. Marcus felt that he had found in Lauren not only an attractive woman, but a companion willing to walk alongside him, with big dreams and a burning passion for life. She also seemed fascinated by him, by his calm, his sincere manner, the way he saw the world with a purity that she found rare. The balance between them was clear: where one was a storm, the other was shelter. It took years of construction, adjustments and learning. The first apartment came soon enough, a small space in an old building that they renovated with their own hands on the weekends. They painted the walls together, chose every piece of furniture, got the kitchen color wrong and laughed for days about the curtains they installed crookedly and left there as a souvenir. Lauren, who was always outgoing, brought the place to life with vibrant paintings and scented candles, while Marcus took care of the lights, the plants and the Sunday breakfast. Mornings were their favorite time of day. Even with the rush of the week, they made a point of sitting together, drinking coffee in silence or discussing the day's news, always with a touch of humor. There was a peace there, a sense of belonging that they both cultivated with zeal. The wedding took place on a late afternoon, outdoors, with close friends and family smiling with emotion. It was one of those days when everything seemed right, when love was evident in the simplest gestures, in the way he adjusted her dress, in the way she looked at him during the vows. Their life together began with plans and promises. Lauren wanted to grow in her career and Marcus supported her without hesitation, even when it meant she would spend more time away from home, in meetings, courses, networking events. He believed that supporting her dreams was an essential part of love, and he did so with pride. While she climbed the corporate ladder, he dedicated himself to his own job as a data analyst, a stable position that allowed him a more flexible routine. The balance seemed perfect, with the two of them sharing the responsibilities of the home, taking care of the house, and the small traditions that kept the couple's intimacy alive. There was affection in her touch when he arrived home tired from work and found his favorite meal ready. There was affection in the messages he left on the bathroom mirror with silly phrases to make her smile. Lauren had always been vain, she liked to dress up, to feel admired, and Marcus never let her feel invisible. He complimented her, noticed her, complimented her again. She liked to be noticed, to know that she was desired, and he made sure to show it. On the weekends, they loved going out to dinner, rediscovering corners of the city, trying new flavors, or simply staying home watching old movies with popcorn and wine. Everything seemed to be in harmony. Over time, of course, differences also arose. Marcus was more reclusive, preferring quiet activities, while Lauren liked excitement, going out, being surrounded by people. At first, this difference was just a curious detail between them, something they laughed about when talking about, but it began to generate small conflicts. She wanted to go out more, to be present at events and company parties, while he preferred the silence of home. Even so, he didn't stop her, he told her that she should live, have fun, be happy, and she did. She always came back with lively stories, laughter and photos on her cell phone. He listened to everything attentively, even though sometimes it felt like he was watching her life from afar. But he never complained. He trusted her. He believed that love was stronger than any distance. And there was love. That was undeniable. Or at least, it seemed there was. Lauren was intense, she made surprises, planned trips, talked enthusiastically about the future, about children, about moving house, buying a new car, maybe even moving to another state when her promotions required it. Marcus kept pace with her, sometimes silently, sometimes with suggestions, always willing to adjust his own pace so that hers wouldn't have to slow down. He had never been a man with many dreams, but she made him dream. He wanted to see her fulfilled, and that was enough for him. Their friends saw them as a model couple. And they were. Or seemed to be. Social media showed it, big smiles, beautiful trips, declarations on wedding anniversaries, spontaneous videos of them cooking together. Anyone looking from the outside would never imagine that there were any flaws. Because, in truth, not even they noticed. The problems came little by little, like an invisible infiltration that spreads without warning. The tight routine, the inconsistent schedules, the increasingly longer silences at night, the hugs that were too quick in the morning. Lauren was increasingly involved with her career, with goals, meetings and trips. Marcus dedicated himself to keeping everything running smoothly, the bills, the house, the meals, the car. When he asked about her day, she answered quickly, looking at her cell phone. When she said she was tired, he massaged her shoulders. And when he tried to talk about himself, about how he felt, she said, "Shall we leave that for another day?" But he understood. It was a phase. Work was demanding. Things would get back to normal. Love, he believed, was resilient. And it was during this phase that her gestures began to change. She started to dress up more, with extra care, even for ordinary events. She arrived later, smiled less. Kisses on the forehead replaced kisses on the lips. Conversations on the couch turned into silent minutes in front of the television. And yet, Marcus insisted. He prepared dinners, left loving notes, planned different weekends. Sometimes, she showed herself to be grateful, and for brief moments, he believed that everything would go back to the way it was before. But something had changed. Something that he still couldn't name, but he felt in his chest like a weight. There were nights when she would come home and not say where she had been. She would just say she was exhausted and wanted to take a shower. And he respected that. He didn't question her. He would get the towel ready, the water hot, make some tea. He would take care of her. Because that was what he knew how to do. Take care. And it was by taking care of himself that he began to realize that something was out of place. A gesture, a look, an absence. But it was not yet time to understand. It was not yet time to confront. For now, he just observed. He tried to keep a structure that was beginning to show cracks standing. And even without knowing it, he was already preparing to face the greatest pain of his life. A pain that would come not like a storm, but like a cold wind in the middle of the night. What he didn't know yet, was that everything he knew as truth was about to come crashing down. It was as if Marcus were in a room lit by candles that were about to go out. Everything around him still had shapes and contours, but the shadows were already beginning to swallow up the details. The days began to have a strange silence, as if there was a constant wait for something he couldn't name. Lauren smiled, talked about her goals at work, the long meetings, and the tiredness that drained her of her mood. She said everything was fine, but her presence seemed absent, floating between the rooms, between her gestures. Marcus watched. The coffee no longer came sweetened like he liked, the notes stopped appearing, her touch was more formal than intimate. He didn't want to believe that love could disappear like that, little by little, like water running through a crack. I had hoped that it was just a tough phase, and like so many others, they would get through it together. But this time, they weren't together anymore. They were walking down the same hallway, but in opposite directions. Lauren's schedules began to stretch out more frequently. At first, it was just a few extra hours at the office, then came the mandatory events, the team meetings, the corporate dinners. She dressed up more diligently than before, and although she said it was just for the work environment, something deep in Marcus's stomach warned him that it wasn't just that. He tried to ignore it, to convince himself that he was being unfair, that it was all in his head, that love shouldn't be confused with paranoia. But the heart of someone who loves also learns to detect absences that no one else sees. Lauren would come back late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, with stories that seemed rehearsed, and even then, Marcus would keep quiet. Trust was what he valued most, and he didn't want to be the kind of man who suspects before knowing. But doubt, once planted, grows like a weed among one's thoughts. A rainy Friday was the trigger for everything. She said she was having a team get-together and that she might not be back anytime soon. Marcus nodded, told her to have fun, but something inside him collapsed. It wasn't jealousy. It was the feeling of being pushed out of a life he had built himself. That night was long. He sat on the couch with his cell phone in his hand, looked at social media, opened the photo album, revisited trips, laughs, framed memories. When midnight struck, she still hadn't come back. No messages. No calls. Just silence. At 2 a.m, she arrived. Her heels on the wood gave away her entrance, and the masculine scent in the air was like a slap in the face. Marcus looked at her with a lump in his throat. She tried to laugh, to say that a colleague had bumped into her and that maybe the smell had gotten to her. He just nodded, silently. But something in him died there. In the following days, Marcus became a divided man. On the outside, he was still the helpful, caring husband, the present man. On the inside, he was a soul under reconstruction, full of questions, discomfort, doubts. He began to pay attention to details that he had previously ignored. He observed the way she held her cell phone, how she smiled to herself while reading messages, how she deleted her browser history. The trust began to melt like ice in the sun. He didn't want to invade, he didn't want to be the one who spies, who is suspicious. But he wanted answers. He couldn't sleep well anymore, he dreamed of images he didn't understand, he woke up with a tight chest. And then he decided to act. He installed a discrete application on the computer they used at home. It wasn't an invasion, he thought, it was survival. He needed to know. The first few weeks brought nothing but ordinary reports, work emails, random research. But one day, among the open tabs, he saw a name that repeated more than the others. It was an old contact, archived, with conversations saved in hidden folders. He read every word with dry eyes, his heart racing. They were intimate messages, exchanges of affection, promises, meetings. There was confirmation. She was betraying him. It wasn't an assumption, it wasn't a fear. It was real. He didn't react with screams or despair. He just turned off the computer and sat there in silence, feeling every part of his body weigh like lead. The ground seemed to spin. The pain was greater than anything he had ever felt, because it wasn't just the betrayal of his body, but of his heart. She had chosen someone else. And the worst part, she was at peace with it. That night, Lauren came home late again. She smiled, as if she felt light, as if everything was okay. Marcus looked at her for a few seconds before saying anything. He asked her calmly if there was anything she wanted to tell him. She hesitated, then shook her head, smiled, and said no, that everything was fine. And it was that answer that destroyed him inside. The cynicism, the comfort with the lie. He just nodded. Said he needed some time to think. She asked why, feigning surprise, and he responded with a look that said it all. She looked away, felt the weight of it, but said nothing more. The following days were even more painful. Lauren avoided the subject, said she was busy, pretended to be normal. Marcus, on the other hand, dove into his memories. He revisited the last few years with her and tried to understand where he had failed. Had he been absent? Had he failed to do something important? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that he had given it his all. He loved with intensity, with presence, with dedication. There was no justification that made sense. One sunny Saturday, while she was taking a shower, Marcus decided to organize the room. He needed to occupy his mind, to do something practical. He opened a drawer that was rarely used, and there, among forgotten papers, he found something he hadn't expected, a letter. It was sealed, with his name on the front. Next to it was an envelope with printed photos. He didn't open it. Not yet. He put everything back and left the room. That would be for later. Sunday arrived with a strange calm. They had coffee together, in silence. She tried to make conversation, to talk about a company trip, but he didn't respond. He was distant, cold, different. Lauren noticed, but didn't insist. In the afternoon, he went out alone, walking aimlessly, thinking about how to move forward. The idea of divorce began to take shape. Not for revenge, but for dignity. He didn't deserve to live in that shadow. That night, while she slept, he finally opened the letter. The handwritten words trembled. She talked about tiredness, about routine, about feeling invisible. She said she had gotten lost, that she hadn't planned any of this, that she didn't want to hurt anyone. But there was no apology. There was no regret. Only excuses. Marcus read it to the end, folded the paper, and put it away again. And then he made his decision. The next day, at dawn, he left early. He stopped at the notary's office, consulted a lawyer, and organized the paperwork. When he returned home, Lauren was still asleep. He left the documents on the living room table. She would wake up alone and see everything there. The truth, naked, formal, undeniable. And that's exactly how it was. He left without saying a word. And when she woke up, she found the beginning of the end that she herself had written with each step towards another man. But what she didn't know yet, was that there was something in that story that could change everything. And this secret, kept for months, was about to come to light. Marcus was determined to move on. He had all the divorce papers in hand, the decisions had been made, his emotions were being sorted one by one, slowly, as if he were picking up the pieces of his own chest. There was no more anger. The love he felt for Lauren had turned into something else, something hard to name, maybe bitter gratitude, maybe just a silent relief. The last few days had been silent between them. She no longer tried to justify herself, she didn't ask questions, she just watched him with empty eyes, as if she knew that everything she could still say would no longer carry any weight. Marcus was clean inside, tired, yes, but clean. Prepared for what would come next. Until the moment she appeared at the door of his office, her face swollen from crying, her hands shaking and an urgency in her eyes that he had never seen before. She didn't ask to come in, she just walked in, as if she didn't know where else she fit. Marcus remained seated, barely looking up. Lauren took a deep breath, and before she could even say anything, she blurted out that she couldn't stand the silence anymore, that she needed to tell the truth, the whole truth, that she couldn't bear to carry this alone anymore. He frowned, confused, because for him everything was already clear. The adultery had been enough, and he thought there was nothing worse than that. But what she said next took the air out of the room. She began by saying that she had never planned to deceive him. That it wasn't something she had thought out, that everything had happened at a speed she couldn't control. And as he spoke, tears flowed uncontrollably. She said that the first time she had been with the other man was during a company event, that she felt guilty, but she couldn't stop. But that what tortured her the most was not what he knew, but what he didn't know. Marcus remained silent. Lauren continued, her voice breaking, saying that the letter he had found weeks ago wasn't the only one. That there was another one, saved in an email she had written but never had the courage to send. Marcus crossed his arms, trying to understand where she was going with this. Lauren then approached, opened her purse with trembling hands, took out her cell phone and, after a few seconds of hesitation, showed him the message. It was dated 3 months earlier. A saved draft, with the title, "Forgive me for hiding this." He took the phone cautiously, and as he read it, the muscles in his face tensed. In the message, Lauren confessed that the betrayal had not been just physical or emotional. She had used his name, without his knowledge, to obtain a personal loan that financed the comfortable life she had with her lover. The beach house where she said she went with her friends was paid for with installments deducted from a joint account to which he had no access. She had forged a signature, changed bank details, made everything seem legitimate. Her lover knew. They were together in this choice. Marcus felt as if he were reading a script for a nightmare. The woman he had shared the last few years with had invaded not only his heart, but his identity, his dignity. His breathing became heavy. His voice, when it came out, was low and sharp. He asked her how she could have done it. How she could have looked him in the eye every day while she signed fake contracts, used his name as a shield, built a second life while he struggled to keep his first one afloat. Lauren broke down. She fell to the floor, crying convulsively, saying that she had lost herself, that she didn't want to hurt him, that she thought she could fix it before he found out. She said that the other man convinced her that they were investing in the future, that it was just a phase, that everything would be resolved soon. But nothing was resolved. And now, here she was, in front of the man she loved the most, begging not for forgiveness, but for him to listen. Marcus didn't scream. He didn't explode. He was in shock, trying to digest that the pain he felt wasn't just because he had been betrayed in love, but because he had been deceived in his essence. Lauren, between sobs, said that it was when she saw the divorce papers that she realized what was real. That everything she had done wasn't worth what she had lost. That he was the only person who had truly loved her, who had taken care of her when she didn't even know what she wanted. That all the wrong choices had been made because she wanted to feel something, wanted to experience something new, but that she had ended up drowning in a lie that had destroyed the only love that was worth it. Marcus sat down slowly, stared into space for a few seconds, and told her that she hadn't just broken his trust, but had hurt something that could never be rebuilt. His identity, his honor, his name. He was a man of integrity, he always had been, and now his name was tied to a debt that wasn't his, to decisions he never authorized. He asked, his voice breaking, if the other man was still part of her life. Lauren shook her head, denying it. She said he disappeared as soon as she mentioned thinking about telling him everything. She said that deep down he never cared, that he just took advantage of her neediness, of the illusion of a comfortable and easy relationship. She had been manipulated, used, and she only realized it when she had lost all hope. Marcus remained silent. His silence said it all. There was nothing more to be said. She tried to touch his hand, but he pulled away. He said that, even with all the love he had felt for her, he could no longer allow her to be part of his story. That she needed to deal with the consequences. And that, yes, he forgave her, not for her sake, but for his own. Because carrying hatred was not in his nature. But forgiveness did not mean reconciliation. There was no room for her on the path he was now walking. Lauren lay there on the floor, devastated. For the first time, she understood the true weight of her choices. The betrayal, the deviation, the lie, the theft disguised as need, all of it now came back like a painful echo. And as she sobbed, Marcus took the keys, opened the door and, before leaving, told her that none of it was a mistake. That everything was a choice. And that choices have a price. The apartment fell silent. The kind of silence that screams. Lauren stood there, alone, with everything she had built crumbling. And Marcus, as he left, knew that a cycle was ending, but something new, much bigger, was beginning. The next day dawned with a heavy sky, clouds trailing by, covering any trace of sun, as if time itself understood that something had been destroyed. Marcus did not return home that night. He walked aimlessly until exhaustion overcame his body. He slept in the car, parked on a quiet street, with the seat reclined and his coat folded over his chest. He did not cry. He had no strength. It was as if his soul was paralyzed, numb after so many layers of pain. His phone remained switched off the entire time. He no longer wanted to hear explanations, excuses, or voices from the past trying to find some gap in his lucidity. When he woke up, he drove to a cafe where he used to go when he needed to think, to reflect on life. He sat at a table in the corner, ordered a black coffee without sugar, and stared at the cup as if searching for answers deep inside the porcelain. The physical betrayal had already hurt, but the revelation of the financial scam, the manipulation of his name, the trust distorted to such an extent, that had pierced his insides. It was more than disappointment, it was humiliation in the form of a forged signature, it was the feeling of being used down to the last thread of dignity. For hours he remained there, in silence, reliving every detail. He remembered how much he loved her, the faith he had placed in her, how he had dreamed of a lifetime with someone who, he now knew, had lived a parallel story with coldness and calculation. When the waiter asked if he wanted anything else, he simply shook his head. And before leaving, he left a generous tip, as he always did, because even with his heart broken, his essence remained intact. When he left the cafe, his fate was no longer uncertain. He knew exactly what he needed to do. He went home, not to argue, but to finish. He entered the apartment and found Lauren sitting on the couch, her eyes sunken, traces of a sleepless night. She stood up immediately when she saw him, as if there was still some hope of reconciliation, but Marcus gave her no room for illusions. He said he needed her to leave the house by the end of that week. He didn't shout, he didn't tremble. It was just the firm voice of someone who had already overcome the fear of breaking up. She tried to argue, but he interrupted her with disconcerting calm. He said he had said everything he needed to and that any attempt to maintain contact would be in vain. She cried again, but Marcus didn't respond. He grabbed some clothes and documents and left. He knew that the next step would be to rebuild everything, not only materially, but emotionally, socially, and legally. He sought out his lawyer, updated his information, shared the documents that confirmed the misuse of his name, and began the process of legal accountability. The pain had turned into action. Not for revenge, but for justice. It was time to put everything in order. In the days that followed, Marcus began to spend more time outside. He rediscovered the city, met up with friends he had forgotten about. Little by little, he began to breathe more easily. During one of these meetings, he met a woman named Camille. She was discreet, soft-spoken, and had a clear gaze. The connection between them came not like a bolt of lightning, but like a gentle breeze. They started talking about books, then about movies, until, without realizing it, they began to see each other frequently. Marcus was not looking for a substitute or distraction. But Camille brought something he had forgotten what it was like: peace. There was no rush, no promises, no demands. There was presence. And that, at that moment, was all he needed. Meanwhile, Lauren remained silent. She left the apartment on time, left the keys on the table, and sent a short message saying she would respect his space. She didn't try to contact him again. Marcus didn't know where she went, nor did he want to know. Until, 3 weeks later, he received an email notification of an attempt to renegotiate the loan she had taken out in his name. That rekindled the wound. He contacted the bank, updated all the information, blocked access, and attached the documents from the lawsuit. A few days later, he received an unexpected call. He was Lauren's father. A reserved man whom Marcus knew but had never had a close relationship with. The voice on the other end was tense, heavy. He said he needed to meet Marcus in person. Reluctantly, he agreed. They met in a public park, where they sat on a bench out of the way. The man was visibly shaken. He said he had only found out about the separation a few days ago and that Lauren had been missing ever since. He said she had quit her job, cut off contact with almost everyone, and no longer wanted to move back in with her parents. Marcus listened attentively, but showed no intention of getting involved. Then her father said something that made him freeze. Before she disappeared, Lauren had left him a letter, another one. A letter that said that everything she had done began with a small mistake, an omission, a choice that she was unable to undo. And inside the envelope was a bank statement. A hidden account. Not in Marcus's name. In her lover's name. And there was the total amount of the embezzled loan, added to the deposits that she herself had been making, little by little. She had tried to fix it. She had tried to raise the total amount. When her lover found out, he withdrew everything and disappeared. He had never loved Lauren. He was only there to benefit from her naivety and the influence she had within the company. When he saw that she was trying to get rid of the debt, he cut off contact and disappeared. Lauren lost everything, her money, her man, her pride. And at that moment, she hid, not out of cowardice, but out of shame. Marcus closed his eyes for a second. It was as if the pain of betrayal had gained another layer. The woman who had destroyed everything out of impulse, out of need, out of escape, was now also a victim of her own illusions. Her father held the paper with shaking hands. He said he didn't know if she would come back. That all that was left was regret. Marcus took the document, took a deep breath, and thanked her for her honesty. There was nothing more that could be done there. Back in his apartment, sitting at the kitchen table he had once shared with Lauren, Marcus thought for long minutes. That story would not have a simple ending. But something in him was beginning to organize itself. A growing certainty that all of this needed to be buried. Not forgotten, but closed. Camille arrived that night with a light smile. She was carrying a pie she had made herself and 2 glasses of wine. When he looked into her eyes, Marcus felt that, for the first time in a long time, someone was truly seeing him. Without shadows, without secrets. And in that calm gaze, he understood that life, no matter how cruel it was in certain chapters, always left room for new beginnings. He didn't need to seek revenge. He had already won. Because while Lauren was drowning in the consequences of her own actions, he was rebuilding his story with dignity. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply moving on, in peace, when the one who destroyed you expected you never to. That night when Camille arrived with the pie still warm and a gentle smile was undoubtedly the first sign of something new. Marcus no longer carried the weight of the divorce papers, nor the despair of the first days of revelation, but what lived in his chest now was more subtle and perhaps more difficult to explain. It was a deep emotional exhaustion, as if his soul had walked miles in silence. He felt torn between the relief of having escaped something devastating and the continuous echo of questions that he still didn't know if he wanted answers to. Camille understood everything. Not with judgments or demands, but with that rare kind of silent presence that understands even what is not said. When she sat next to him that night and handed him a glass of wine, it was not just a romantic gesture, it was an invitation to the possibility of another story, a new beginning written calmly, far from lies and destruction. In the following days, life seemed to be entering a transitional phase. Marcus began to reorganize the apartment, removing old objects, photos, and memories that had previously occupied physical and emotional space. Not as someone who denies the past, but as someone who chooses to make room for the present. The dilemma now was no longer anger or the desire for justice, this had already been addressed in court, but rather what to do with everything that was left. There were still people asking about Lauren, messages that arrived, questions that arose as the weeks went by. And her silence, which had previously seemed like a relief, began to take on a new weight. No one knew where she was, or even if she was okay. Her father, who had handed over the papers with the hidden account, also had no idea of her whereabouts. This worried Marcus in a strange way. Not because I wanted to know about her, but because she had always been someone who needed clear closure. And her total absence, her disappearance, left a crack open in a door that he wanted to close once and for all. Camille noticed this uneasiness in Marcus's gestures. One afternoon, while they were walking together through an open-air market, she carefully commented that perhaps, in order for him to truly move on, it would be necessary to face the void left by Lauren not with indifference, but with understanding. He didn't respond right away, but that idea kept hammering away in his mind. He began to wonder if it was really possible to move on while completely ignoring what was left behind. And, as much as he didn't want to admit it, there was still a part of him that wanted to understand how far Lauren had fallen, how far she had lost herself. Not because he wanted to rescue something, but to clearly close the pages of that story. Then, without warning, on a Thursday night, his phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer it. On the other end, a voice he recognized immediately, even though it was choked up. Lauren. She was weak, with an intonation that betrayed sleepless nights, a life patched up with guilt. She simply said that she needed to talk to him in person. That she wasn't asking for forgiveness, nor seeking comfort. She just wanted to tell him something. Marcus hesitated. But he accepted. They arranged to meet in a discreet park, far from eyes and memories. When he saw her arriving, he realized that the woman before him was just a shadow of the woman he had known. Her glow had disappeared, her face was haggard, and her eyes seemed to carry more pain than words. She didn't ask for a hug, she didn't try to get close to him with affection. She just sat there in silence for a long time, staring at the fallen leaves on the floor. Then he started talking. He said that after he left the apartment, he tried to get back on his feet, tried to go back to work, but that everything seemed to be falling apart out of control. The man she had gotten involved with had disappeared with the money and left her not only with the debt, but with contempt. When her co-workers heard the story, they distanced themselves. She lost credibility, she lost her connections. But what hurt the most, he confessed, was realizing that she had nowhere to go back to. Her parents took her in for a while, but the atmosphere was unbearable. She didn't want pity. And it was when she found herself alone, with nothing, that she started attending an emotional support group, without giving her name, without telling her story in full. I needed anonymity to start from scratch. Marcus listened, still not knowing where she was going with this. Then, finally, she told him that the bill he had seen was not the only secret. Back when they were together, she had left a life insurance policy in his name, worth twice the amount of the loan she had taken out. Something that no one knew. She said it was her silent way of trying to compensate, even indirectly, for the damage she was causing. She never had the courage to tell him, or to cancel it. It was there, active, like a kind of debt to her own conscience. Marcus remained silent. That had pierced him unexpectedly. It wasn't money that was at stake. It was the gesture. A silent guilt trying to find some kind of redemption. She looked into his eyes for the first time since they met again and said that she expected nothing. That there was no hope, no pretense. That all that was left of her was the recognition of everything she had destroyed. And that, somehow, she needed him to know that she had finally seen the incredible man he was. And that she deeply regretted not having seen it before. She said that he was her biggest mistake. And her biggest loss. Marcus just took a deep breath. He didn't say that he forgave her. He didn't say that he understood. He just stood up and, before leaving, said that he hoped she would find some peace. That everyone deserves it, even those who make mistakes. But that, from that point on, she didn't want any more news. She needed to truly end that story. On the way back, the world seemed quieter. There was no euphoria, no anger, no immediate relief. It was as if everything was finally in place. Marcus arrived home and found Camille reading a book, sitting on the porch. He approached, rested his head on her shoulder, and they both sat there in silence. She didn't ask anything. She just held his hand firmly. Because sometimes, all someone needs is exactly that, the presence of someone who doesn't demand explanations. Marcus closed his eyes and, for the first time, felt that the past had finally become just a memory. And the future, at last, could begin to be built. That same night, after everything that had been said, after the silence between words and between the lines that screamed louder than gestures, Marcus went home with a feeling he had never experienced before. It was no longer pain, nor anger, nor mourning. It was like an old tiredness being replaced by a serene acceptance, not passive, but firm. There was something in him that was silently reorganizing itself, as if the internal parts of his identity, previously scattered across the floor of all the memories he had lived, were beginning to find their places. He no longer thought about revenge, nor justice, nor reconstruction. That had already been done. Now it was different. It was as if, for the first time, he was faced with the real opportunity to rewrite his existence with his own hands, free from any emotional ties. Camille, noticing this new state in Marcus, became increasingly present, but never invasive. She occupied the spaces with admirable lightness. Her gestures did not ask for attention, but offered support. Marcus felt welcomed, and that was rare. Many times, during the weeks that followed his reunion with Lauren, he found himself observing Camille from afar, her eyes attentive to the details of the house, the delicate way she placed her cup on the table, her fingers intertwined with his as they walked. And there, without haste, without fanfare, he began to realize that he was no longer the same man he had been before. Something inside him had matured, hardened in certain areas, but also become more sensitive in others. It was one Saturday morning, while they were having coffee on the porch, that Camille broke the silence. She placed the mug on the railing and said, in a low voice, that she needed to know if he was ready. Marcus looked at her, not understanding at first. Camille then explained that she had known since day one that he still carried an open story inside him. That no matter how much he tried to distance himself from the past, certain wounds needed to be named before they could heal. She said that she was not afraid of what he still needed to process, but that she did not want to be a temporary remedy for a permanent problem. Marcus took a deep breath. And for the first time, he talked to her about everything, without hiding, without dramatizing. He told her about the betrayal, about the loan, about the disappearance of his lover, about his reunion with Lauren, about the policy. Camille listened to everything without interrupting, just looking into his eyes. When he finished, she did not say anything right away. She simply stood up, ran her hand through her hair and walked a few steps before turning around again. She said she admired him even more for having told him everything. That he was a man of integrity and that there was no shame in having been hurt by the one he loved. But now he needed to decide. She said that relationships are not built on the ruins of old ones, but on the clarity of where each person is emotionally. Marcus understood. It was time to stop carrying the guilt that was not his. It was time to accept that love, when poorly chosen, hurts, but when lived well, it heals. And in that moment, he felt something similar to freedom. A type of freedom that did not come from the absence of ties, but from the conscious choice of who to build the next chapters with. From that point on, everything began to happen more clearly. Marcus began to make plans with Camille. Nothing grand or impulsive. Just real, tangible plans. A short trip to the countryside, the idea of adopting a dog, entire afternoons choosing new furniture to replace the old ones that still carried the smell of past memories. One by one, the details of the old scenery were replaced not to erase the past, but to redesign the present. Life began again there, without fanfare, but firmly. However, there was still something pending. Marcus needed to finally clear his name officially. The legal process continued, but now with irrefutable evidence of the forgery and misuse of his identity. Lauren's defense had been filed by a new lawyer, and it contained a personal letter written by her. It was brief but direct. She acknowledged everything. She admitted her mistakes, dismissed any attempt at argumentation, and said that she was willing to face the civil and criminal consequences of her actions. Marcus read it strangely. It was hard to believe that she had finally stopped fighting against what was obvious. When his lawyer asked if he wanted to seek more severe compensation, he refused. He said that all he needed was to see his name cleared and his rights restored. He wanted peace, not revenge. Shortly after, he received some final news. Lauren had left the support group and moved to another city. She had gotten a modest job as a receptionist at a dental clinic, using her maiden name. She had abandoned her social networks, old contacts, everything. This time, she had disappeared by choice. Marcus didn't say anything to Camille. He didn't feel the need to. It was a closed chapter. And there was nothing to explain about something that was no longer part of him. But it wasn't until one Sunday afternoon that Camille looked at him and said, "You're smiling with your eyes again," that Marcus realized how much he had changed. He was no longer a man trying to be strong. He was now someone who had survived and decided to live again. And that made all the difference. There was no more dilemma, no more doubt, no more cracks. The story that had destroyed him had also rebuilt him, and now he knew that no one else would have the power to break him like that again. And as Camille closed her eyes and rested her head on his shoulder, he looked up at the clear, blue sky, as if finally understanding that after a long storm, the air always feels purer. And maybe, just maybe, life knew exactly what it was doing when it forced him to start over from scratch. Time passed like a steady tide, taking with it the last vestiges of a story marked by love, ruin and rebirth. Marcus, now in another phase of life, walked differently. He was no longer the man who distrusted his own shadow, nor the one who reviewed old messages in search of signs. His heart had stopped being a battlefield. It had become home again. Camille followed him not as someone who completed him, but as someone who shared a life built on presence and truth. They had moved to a new house, smaller but cozy, with a backyard where he grew mint, lavender and small basil plants that she loved to add to her dinner sauces. The atmosphere was light. There were no secrets, no remnants of the past. Just sincere conversations, real plans and a peace he never imagined he would feel after all this. The story with Lauren, although over, had left its mark on him, and in some way shaped who he had become. The last news he had about her came without warning, through a call from an unknown lawyer. It was a formal request for him to attend the final signing of a bank transfer. Lauren, in a final gesture that no one expected, had decided to sell everything she owned, pay off the fraudulent loan in full, and deposit the remaining amount, now free of any legal obligation, directly into his account. Not by court order, not by pressure. It was a choice. Marcus signed the papers without hesitation. Not because of the amount, but because of the conclusion. At the end of that process, his name was not only cleared from the records, but also from the memories he carried. It was the absolute end of any link with the past. Camille, upon hearing this, simply held his hand and said that sometimes the best response to the harm done to us is the transformation we choose to have afterwards. And she was right. Marcus didn't want to know what had motivated Lauren to make such a decision. Whether it was regret, redemption, or despair. That didn't matter anymore. It was a dignified final point. Something that firmly sealed what had been pending for so long. Days later, he received a simple letter, with no return address. It was written in the same handwriting as before, but different in tone. Lauren said that she had understood, too late, that the love she had lost would never be replaced. That she had spent her life trying to fill voids with impulses, when all she needed was in what she had destroyed. The letter ended with a single sentence: "I hope you are happy in a way I never knew how to be." Marcus read it once, folded it carefully and burned it in silence. Some words don't need to be kept. Only overcome. And then came the most symbolic moment of all. One sunny Sunday, Camille called him to the backyard, where she had prepared a little surprise. She had planted a tree. Not a sapling, but a young, strong tree with firm roots. She said she wanted it to grow there, in that place, as a sign of everything they had started over together. He smiled, touched the earth, and felt the exact opposite of what he had experienced before: growth, future, permanence. The wedding took place months later, in a discreet ceremony among friends and family, with few decorations and many truths. There were no luxuries, but there was truth in every look, in every promise exchanged. Marcus, standing before the altar, said a few words, but each one deeply felt. Today I am not starting over. Today I am continuing. Because being with you is being in motion from day one. Meanwhile, Lauren had moved away permanently. She now lived in a small town where no one knew her. She worked in a simple administrative position, attended church on Sundays, and cared for an elderly woman in exchange for housing. She was a different woman. The one who had once felt in control of everything was now just someone trying to make up for what was left of herself. She no longer sought love or recognition. Only peace. In a note she gave to the social worker who was with her, she wrote that she knew she would never be remembered fondly again, but that she would accept it if it meant that at least a part of what she had destroyed could be rebuilt. Their story came to an end without revenge, without scandals. It came to an end with maturity, with difficult choices, with consequences. Marcus didn't just overcome, he evolved. And his comeback didn't come with shouting or revenge. It came with silence, work, resilience, and true love. Because the real shock wasn't what Lauren caused with her betrayal. It was what he built with his reconstruction. What Camille found wasn't a broken man. It was a man who knew how to put himself back together with his own hands. And that made all the difference. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Have you ever experienced something similar, or do you know someone who has been through betrayal? Comment below and share your opinion, your experience, or what touched your heart the most in this narrative. And if you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel, like it, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories like this. Here, we don't romanticize betrayal. We show how it destroys lives, breaks up homes, and leaves deep scars that not even time can easily erase. Let this story serve as a warning, as a source of reflection. Betrayal does not begin with a hidden kiss. It begins with absence, with a small lie, with a glance averted. And when trust is broken, not even the deepest love can rebuild what was shattered. Be loyal. Be true. Because when pure love is destroyed, the loss is greater than it seems. And remember, this channel is against any kind of betrayal. Always.